The New Testament character named Timothy is often pegged as being one who struggled with cowardice, with timidity, with fear. And that's basically generally only from one verse we get that idea. It's from 2 Timothy 1, verse 7, where it says this. It's the Apostle Paul writing to Timothy. He says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Now, I've heard this preached and taught so many times that Timothy had this natural timidity to him, this natural fear, this natural cowardice, whatever word you want to use. And actually, I don't really believe that. I don't think that fits with the story that we know of Timothy. At the same time, though, I know when it's been preached this way, people who have struggled with their faith, struggled with being bold in their faith and living it out, they say, well, I can relate to this guy Timothy because he seemed to have some cowardice and fear as well. And that's not really going to be the focus, but let me just address that for a second. I think if we read the New Testament for what it's worth, what we see is a very different picture of Timothy. We don't see a picture of a man who is struggling with timidity or cowardice or fear. What we see is a man who was willing to go the distance into whatever situation he was put in. First of all, Paul says in Philippians 2:20, "I have no one like him," right? I know no one like him who will care for your genuine welfare. Now that doesn't really speak about his character, other than to say that he was concerned for people's welfare. But Paul makes a statement he makes about nobody else. There's no one like him. And if you understand the relationship they had, Timothy was like Paul's right-hand man. And as Paul was this apostle who had pioneered all of these churches all over Asia Minor, he couldn't be in every place at all times. And so when churches were struggling and things were going on, he needed to be able to send people he could trust into those situations. For instance, Thessalonica was a church that was struggling with a lot of persecution against it at that time. And who does Paul send? Paul sends Timothy. Would you send someone to a situation where the church is being persecuted, literally people are being killed for their faith, and they need encouragement? Would you send someone who is timid, or someone who is cowardly, or someone who is fearful into that situation? I'm not sure you would. I think you'd send someone who could go the distance. The church in Ephesus, they had some sinful management. So there was some leadership issues going on there, some problems going on. And who does Paul send? Again, he sends Timothy. Why would you send someone who was not reliable when it came to situations, being able to stand up for yourself and not be timid? Why would you send someone like that? See, I think that Timothy was not a man of fear at all. I think he was very bold, very powerful, and walked in some amazing things. And so I think when we get to this passage where Paul says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love of self-control," if we say that he, by extension of this verse, that he was a person of fear, then by extension we also have to say that he was not a person of power and of love of self-control. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's a characteristic. In fact, Paul also says, "For God gave us." So he includes himself in this address to Timothy. I think Timothy was something very different. So this leads us to the question of that, then, why would Paul have said, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power, of love, and self-control"? What reason is there for putting the fear part into it at all? And I think we need to step back from this for a minute and realize that this is a literary device that's being used here. The literary device is one of contrast, right? So we contrast that which is not from God with that which is from God. And in contrasting the two, we see how much better the one is than the other. So a spirit of fear, that's not what God gives. If you are a follower of Jesus today, you have not been given a spirit of fear. That's not the way God works, okay? Rather, God gives a spirit of power and of love and of self-control. These are things that we cannot make up on our own. We cannot manufacture them. They require help from God. But great, Jeremy, so he gave us power, love, self-control. What's that mean? How does that impact my life? Well, let's look at the word power for a second. The word power comes from the Greek word dunamis, which, if you think about it, it sounds a lot like an English word or similar to an English word. The English word that we get from this is dynamite, right? And what do we know about dynamite? Small package, huge effect, okay? And I think this is one of the things that we need to keep in mind about the power that comes from God. We don't necessarily see it in the moment. We don't necessarily know when it's going to appear. But what we do know, what this word is about, is miraculous power. It's about abundance. It's about strength. It's about mighty, wonderful works of God. The power, the spirit of power that is given to us by the Holy Spirit is one that's miraculous and one that is abundant. And it is oftentimes something that seems very, very small, but it can affect a very large area, kind of like a stick of dynamite. The second thing that God says, or that Paul says that God has given, is the spirit of love. Now, in English, we have the word love, and we can love pizza and we can love people, and we use that word in so many different ways. Greek actually has a number of words for love that are used in the New Testament. The one used here is agape, which comes from the Greek word agapeo, which is benevolent or unconditional love, that which is charitable. It's the type of love that is required to go the distance. It's the type of love that allows us to love somebody even when they're being an absolute mean, nasty person to us. It's the type of love that will keep us trying and endeavoring for the benefit of others, even when the situation seems dire and impossible, right? Just combine the spirit of power, this dynamic power of God, with this unconditional love of God. That's a pretty powerful combination, right? The third thing that the Apostle Paul talks about there is self-control. We can think of this as sound mind or discipline. And if we think about situations that we are put into where they could be fearful, they could be scary, they could be ones that we just don't feel like we have the answers for, what we need is to have sound mind. We need discipline that allows us to stay there and not run when the going gets tough. And it's in those moments where that self-control and discipline that we have because of the Spirit of God reminds us of God's power and reminds us of God's love, which will come through at the appropriate time. And so the Apostle Paul is trying to make this contrast. God doesn't give us fear. No, on the other hand, he gives us something way better than fear, because we all know that fear isn't good. Fear's really terrible. God gives us something way better. He gives us power, love, and self-control. And so Paul's encouraging Timothy, remember that God has given you these things. When you get into these difficult situations, God has what you need, and he will give it to you in measure as you need it. So again, let me go back to something I said earlier. If you are a follower of Jesus today, you're not being given a spirit of fear, but you're being given and have been given, because God's Spirit lives in you, great power, great love, and great self-control, which will help you in any situation. It will empower you to do things that would seem impossible otherwise. This is what God gives us, and way more beyond. But for the context of this verse, miraculous power, unconditional love, and discipline for any situation we might find ourselves in. If you feel like you lack anything as you get into those situations, go to God and ask him to empower you. Ask him to reveal to you his power and his love and his self-control in your life. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.